I'll just wait till everyone looks like they're in. All right. Looks like we've got everyone here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So we'll kick off with our webinar on the compliance monitoring and enforcement strategy for 2025 to 2028. Kia ora koutou, ko Ainsley Ryder tōku ingoa. I'm the Principal Advisor for Operational Planning here at the Border Services Authority, Taumata Arawai. And before we kick into it, this is our kind of organisational vision, and I did want to just bring it up as our reminder before we get started. Kia tiakina te wai, he oranga mō te katoa, safe water every day for everyone, and that's really why we're all here today and what the focus of our strategy is. So today we're going to be talking about, as I said, our compliance monitoring and enforcement strategy. If you're not familiar with the work of our organisation, we are the drinking water regulator for New Zealand, but we also have an oversight role of wastewater and stormwater and set environmental standards for those as well. The compliance monitoring and enforcement strategy really focuses on drinking water. So plan for today is we'll have start with an introduction and overview. So Steve Taylor is with us. He's our head of operations, is going to give a bit of a strategic view. I'll then introduce a few of the key aspects of the compliance monitoring and enforcement strategy. We shorten that to the CME. So if you hear us say CME, that's what we're talking about. We'll then hand to Noah Hensley, who is our technical manager, and he's going to talk through a little bit more about what we mean by basic and effective barriers, which is one of those key components of the CME. And then we're going to hear from a few of our operational teams who focus on some of the different groups of drinking water suppliers. So Neil Shaw is our water services manager for the North Island. He's going to talk about our approach to council and council controlled organisation suppliers and all of those suppliers that operate on behalf of councils. Rachel East is our water services manager for the South Island. She'll talk about our approach to central government and commercial suppliers. And Troy Putter is our community supplies manager, and he's going to talk about our approach to community suppliers. And then we'll round that all out with a discussion of our approach to compliance monitoring and intervention. So I'll hand over next to Steve.
Kia ora koutou, thanks Ainsley. And as Ainsley mentioned, I'm the head of operations at the Water Services Authority. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the acknowledgement of 4 years of work from the authority and a lot of information and reporting that's been provided by the sector. So the CME, as Ainsley's alluded to, it's our way of monitoring and enforcing compliance with the Water Services Act. So obviously that's the overarching legislation that the secondary regulations such as drinking water quality assurance rules and acceptable solutions hang off. So the CME talks to how we'll administer that and what you can expect from us when issues occur or in advance of those issues occurring. So as I say, 4 years of data, insights and reporting has led us to where we are now and what we've learned over that period. Some of you might be familiar with the 2024 Drinking Water Regulation Report that was released earlier this year. And what was identified through that report is that we're seeing a drinking water system that's maturing. So it's gone from a largely unregulated period previously to one where we're seeing improvements in performance, improvements in compliance. The level of reporting that's coming to us is meaning that we've got a better handle actually on where those risks are. And certainly suppliers are taking their responsibility seriously, and that's encouraging. We're also seeing, though, that there's some critical gaps, particularly in smaller suppliers and those that don't have effective treatment or risk management capability. So on plus, we've had significant improvements in reporting against the rules. So back in 2023, it was about 76% reporting. Now it's 90% on 2024, and I think we're seeing month-on-month improvements from that as well. So that's an encouraging trend, and we'd like to see that continue. Likewise, we saw about 500,000 New Zealanders get access to safer drinking water, but there are still about 290,000 people that are drinking water that has not been treated for bacteria or protozoa. So obviously that's a concern. And likewise, we're still seeing significant numbers of E. coli exceedances, and that's an ongoing risk to public health. So E. coli obviously is an indicator of fecal contamination and the likelihood of pathogens that will cause illness in drinking water. By the time that E. coli is detected, contamination's already occurred and the water's been provided to consumers. And we see the consequences of that. As recently as last month, we had a single contamination event that resulted in 47 people becoming very ill and 6 hospitalised. So these aren't theoreticals. When we're talking about E. coli contamination, the risk on public health is real and the risk on those communities is very real. And this is why when we are concerned about the lack of risk management, we're taking it seriously, both personally and as members of communities as well. So that action on E. coli is absolutely essential. So responding when those situations do occur, but the most effective approach is actually to prevent pathogens entering that drinking water in the first place. And that's why we're focusing on 4 key risks. And I'll let others talk to those in more detail. And that's why we're focused on getting the basics in place. We know if you're here, it means you're worried about the provision of safe drinking water. You want to do the right thing, and we know that everybody's committed to that. We also understand that everybody's at a different point on that journey. Some will be more advanced than others, and I'm hoping that through today's presentation, you'll at least have a clearer view of what you should be doing to ensure your basic compliance obligations are met and continue to progress towards the provision of safe water every day. Thanks, Ainsley.
Thanks, Steve. And before I go to the next one, I'll just mention we do have the chat and the Q&A open. So if you do have any questions that crop up through this presentation, feel free to pop them in there, and we should have a bit of time at the end to take any questions. So do feel free to add them in as we go, and we'll carry on. So the next slide really does focus on those 4 key risks that Steve alluded to, and the 4 that we've identified as focus areas for this CME. Microbial contamination, so that's the likes of E. coli or microbiological contaminants. We've got chemical contamination, physical contaminants that affect treatment, and loss or interruption of supply. And a little bit later, when Noah goes into the talk about barriers to contamination and the effectiveness of those barriers, that's intended to really protect against these key risks. So as Steve mentioned, these risks are very real to our community, and they're very real through the data that we've been gathering during our time so far as the Water Services Authority. And I think beyond that as well, communities have a reasonable expectation that the drinking water that they're supplied with is safe. And actually, as drinking water suppliers, you have a responsibility to tell the people that you serve, and us as well, about those risks to drinking water safety and sufficiency, and to really be transparent with your community when there is a risk to their health. So those key risks form a bit of a foundation. Obviously, it's a real focus in that sense on the harm, but one thing that we wanted to do with the CME as well was to really think about, we can focus on harm, but we also want to focus on what we can do about it. And as a drinking water supplier, what are those kind of basic steps that you take towards providing safer drinking water? We know as well that, and Steve already mentioned, that suppliers face quite different challenges, and different treatment systems require different levels of complexity, but there's also a bit of a consistent journey that every drinking water supplier needs to take to get from unsafe water or untreated source water to safe drinking water. So this pipeline to safe drinking water is intended to do that. Really, I think the further along this pipeline a drinking water supplier is, the lower the likelihood that one of those key risks being introduced to your supply in some way will actually lead to unsafe water being provided to communities. So that's what this is intended to communicate. And the first part of that focus is really on actually the source water itself. Understanding your source water and what risks and contaminants are present to determine the best treatment process for your supply. So that understanding before you even start treating your water is really critical to understanding what you actually need to do to make it safe. Next on the pipeline is those basic barriers, and that's really about multi-barrier protections. This is going to vary depending on your source water, the different risks and contaminants that are present, the size of your supply, and your chosen pathway to compliance as well. So those basic barriers will look different if you're kind of a small water supply serving less than 100 people to one of those large supplies that serve thousands. Once those barriers are in place, they need to be operating effectively. It's sort of the difference between having, say, a UV unit actually installed for your supply and then it actually being turned on and operating within the specifications that it's designed for. So effectiveness is about having the right processes in place to ensure that your treatment barriers are working properly, and that they support a reliable multi-barrier approach. So it's also having people with the right skills, clear procedures, your regular maintenance, and monitoring water quality to pick up if there are any changes. And then we get to kind of the upper end of the pipeline, and it really starts to focus on active management of risks. So risk management is the process of identifying risks to the safety of the drinking water you supply and then taking action to address them. For suppliers that follow the rules, drinking water safety planning is really central to this process. But it's also about looking ahead to identify things that may not be have an impact on your supply just yet, but might have an impact in the future. So those emerging contaminants and some of those other things that may cause a risk to your supply. And then resilience to disruptions. I suppose if you think about the earlier parts of this pipeline are really focused on managing your supply on a good day, or at least a relatively normal day. Resilience to disruptions is about what happens on a bad day. And there are different levels to that, right? You've got, at the most basic level, it's what's your backup plan if you lose a critical piece of equipment, or if there's a supply chain disruption for a key chemical that you need for your treatment process. But at the upper end, it's thinking about, what natural hazard events or business continuity disruptions may present a risk to your supply, and what do you have in place to manage their impacts? Or what's your plan if you lose power or road access to a key site? So that resilience is really starting to think about what happens if a normal day doesn't happen, but if something goes on that presents an additional risk to your consumers. And then safe drinking water every day is, of course, the goal. It's it's a great and aspirational goal, but by stepping through this process, it's a great way to get as close as we can to that goal. So now I'm going to hand over to Noah, who's going to talk to that in a bit more detail about those basic barriers and what we're looking for as signals that they're effective. So Noah.
Thanks, Ainsley. So most of you will be aware of, there's kind of 4 basic barriers, so this won't be a surprise to you. But it is good for us to just come out and say it. We've looked at source water protection as kind of your primary barrier. It's your first port of call for protecting drinking water. Things like there's a picture of a fence with a reservoir there. We don't expect everybody to have security fences around the reservoir, but it's just kind of an image to show you that you need to protect your source water. Making sure that you have a quality and sufficient source of water from which to extract is really the point of that barrier. With filtration, so that's kind of your next step of treatment. And usually the first step of treatment, this is just ensuring that your water is clean and clear. So filters can remove some pathogens, but not all those pathogens. It's very much about ensuring that water is prepared for disinfection. With disinfection, essentially this is just disabling pathogens or killing them, making sure that the water is safe to drink. Chlorine bleach has been used for over a century to protect public health from waterborne diseases. UV treatment has been used for decades, so these are both really well established technologies commonly used in New Zealand to make water safe to drink. And finally, you have to get it to the customers or your consumers. So making sure that your backflow prevention devices are installed where they need to be, that you've checked them, maintained them, making sure that your infrastructure is up to scratch, that you're not losing too much water, and that your pipes aren't degrading and bursting all over the place. Those can and do introduce contamination to the supply. So making sure that you have secure distribution zones, good quality pipes, good reservoirs, and good practices is key. So each one of these barriers manages the risks that Ainsley talked about. So for source water protection, it kind of can cover all those risks from microbial contamination, making sure cows stay out of the waterway upstream of your intake, chemical risks, making sure that you're monitoring for some of those chemical risks, ensuring that if there's a storm and a tree blocks your intake, that you have plans to restore supply, and make sure that you have those plans so that your supply is not interrupted. One example of this, or a sign that you have an effective barrier, is having a sanitary borehead, making sure that where that's required, that you have those requirements met, but also making sure that you're fully compliant with our source water monitoring rules. For filtration, this manages some level of microbial contamination, can control for chemical risks as well, depending on the situation, and certainly can clarify the water and remove physical contamination like turbidity. So what we're looking for here is that they're present where you need them. If that water needs to be clarified before disinfection to make sure disinfection's effective, then you need those filters present. And then also making sure your filters are performing optimally. And I specifically didn't say compliant here because that's assumed. You should have compliant filters, but you're best suited to know whether they're actually performing optimally. The complexity of filters can vary. It can be very simple cartridge filters all the way to rapid media filtration, which is a bit more complex. With disinfection, primarily this is microbial, manages microbial risks, where disinfection is in place, making sure that that's performing optimally, which again is compliant with the rules, making sure that your dose is appropriate at all times is really, really key. In terms of secure distribution, this also manages most of these risks. And one example of this is just the backflow prevention devices, which I mentioned before, and also ensuring that you have compliant distribution monitoring, that you're monitoring for the chemicals you need to monitor for in the distribution, and that you're monitoring for the likes of E. coli or total coliforms so that you can respond to indications that the water has become unsafe. And now we'll hand on to the next person.
We'll pass on now to some of our, thanks for that, Noah, to some of our operational managers. These three will probably be fairly familiar faces to some of you. So first we'll move on to Neil to talk about council supplies.
Thanks, Ainsley. Kia ora koutou. My name's Neil Shaw. I'm the Manager of Water Services for the North Island, based in our office in Hamilton. So council supplies and their place in the compliance monitoring enforcement strategy. So by council supplies, we are meaning council suppliers and council control organisations under Local Water Done Well, or any other entity created or service delivery model created as part of that. And so our focus is, or our outcome expected of council supplies by 2028, which is the end of our CME period, is that councils will lead the way effectively managing risks. They'll be able to demonstrate full compliance and building a strong culture of drinking water safety. We do expect that the larger and better resource councils and entities will model excellence and support overall system improvement. So for the first year, our focus will be on, as Ainsley said, basic treatment barriers being installed and operational, and that they're actively, or that they're working effectively. And we're also expecting that suppliers will address the root cause of drinking water safety issues. Our expectation is, or we will have a low tolerance for repeat E. coli notifications or evidence of ineffective ineffective treatment barriers. We'll cover that off but later on when we talk about how we're going to do some of this. And the other expectation is that all councils will be registered. So you will be aware that registration has changed to 5 years. So if your suppliers are currently registered, they'll move out to 5 years from when they were last registered. If they were overdue at the time of the legislative change, they'll need to be renewed now, and they'll get a 5-year registration from that time. And then in the 26-27 year, we'll be looking at ensuring that councils have achieving full compliance with the rules, or an acceptable solution if an acceptable solution is the preferred option or pathway to compliance. And we'll also be looking that to see council submitting accurate and complete reporting, and that reporting is done in a timely fashion. That'll provide us with assurance that the barriers are operating effectively. And lastly, in the last year, and as we move into 2028, we'll be looking to see that your drinking water safety plans are robust, they've been improved over time, and that contamination events needing consumer advisories are going to be extremely rare. So some of the things we also want to see is we expect the response to safety risks to be clearly owned by council suppliers and managed with transparency for consumers. Ainsley touched on that in her opening to this webinar. And we also be looking to see that the drinking water safety plans or management plans reflect this approach. How will you know you're on the right track? E. coli notifications will be a very rare occurrence, and councils will be dealing with them promptly. We hope not to see long-term consumer advisories in place, and that's a current focus for us, is that where council suppliers particularly have long-term consumer advisories in place, we're actively working with those councils to ensure that they are have a plan in place to lift them and ensure that safe drinking water is provided without the need for a boil-award notice. We'll be looking at comparing your drinking water safety plans over time to see that you are taking action to manage your key drinking water safety risks. And the other thing that will ensure you know you're on the right track is that you'll be fully compliant with the rules, and you'll be providing accurate and timely reporting to us. So that's the key expectations of councils, and we'll continue to engage and push that message in the CME with you throughout the next 3 years and beyond. So thanks, Ainsley, and pass it over now, I think, Rachel.
Thanks, Neil. Kia ora koutou, ko Rachel East aho. Can I have the next slide, please, Ainsley? We're just looking at central government and commercial supplies now. So when we talk about central government supplies, that includes supplies that are owned and operated by central government agencies, and commercial supplies refer to those organisations that are generally operated to make a profit. They may or may not be selling water, but they are providing water for people to drink. So for this group of suppliers, we are expecting that they are using reliable treatment. So that's treatment that's maintained and works effectively over time, and that they have adequate monitoring practices in place, as well as continuing to build their ability to manage risks across the full supply. So if you think about having the barriers installed and they're working correctly, they're maintained, they're operated in a way that you know that they're effective, then we should see reduced frequency of E. coli and chemical notifications or exceedances of the drinking water standard, and there shouldn't be those long-term consumer advisories in place either. If you're doing these things, you'll also be able to comply with the rules, and in that way you'll be able to report to us in a timely and accurate manner as well. And we should also see an increase in the quality of drinking water safety plans. So if you're looking at managing those risks across the full supply, you'll be documenting those in your drinking water safety plan. I'm going to hand over to Troy now.
Kia ora everybody, my name's Troy Putter. I'm the manager for the community supplies team. Hey look, we've heard phrases like risk management, E. coli contamination, identifying the 4 key risks and basic barriers being in place. Those are pretty much key themes that resonate for the community supplies. And what we do know is there's just over 1,000 registered community supplies, which includes private and mixed-use supplies, including marae and papakainga. If you were at the water conference, you would have heard our board chair mention the Water Services Authority, Taumatara Wai, will be a regulator with teeth. And while that is absolutely correct, it would be fair to say that in terms of community supplies, you would have noticed that on the diagram showing exactly where, or the different stages of the pipeline for safe drinking water, community supplies is not as far progressed as the others, as the council or commercial, and there's a reason for that, and those reasons include, what we do know is a lot of those community supplies are operated by voluntary people. Further to that, they're very under-resourced. So as a result of that, there is an aspect of leeway being applied towards community supplies. So there is a question of us, my team in particular, alongside the other people who have spoken, working together to support, provide guidance, advice to these community supplies to ensure that they can progress further along that pipeline to achieve safe drinking water for everybody every day. Choosing a compliance pathway. Okay, so we've got registration of your supply, and with that comes adherence to the drinking water quality assurance rules, providing a drinking water safety plan, source water risk management plan, and regular monitoring. The other option is acceptable solutions, and we've just done a heap of work and provided a heap of work which you'll find on our website around small to medium networks for less than 500 people. Also self-supply buildings and mixed-use rural. So there's a ton of information that's available for those on our website. You would have heard Noah kōrero about installation of basic treatment barriers, and that's pretty key for community supplies. It would be fair to say that risk identification and management is one of the key factors that we're trying to drive in this space for community supplies. Regular test and report on water quality. Okay, so that's dependent on factors such as your compliance pathway that you choose, your population served. There are other treatment processes which can be used if they comply with the drinking water quality assurance rules. Responding appropriately to incidents, so that's pretty key. I'm an East Coast boy from the Tairāwhiti, and as you're well aware, they have been pummeled in the last couple of years. So understanding the processes around how to respond appropriately to incidents such as flooding, such as drought, notifications of E. coli. Those are key, and those are also part of the suite of kaupapa that we're trying to drive for community supplies. And I'm going to speak shortly about guidance and how we can assist with that. Building an understanding of drinking water safety risks. So this is all about building an intimate knowledge of your source and how it reacts to, as I mentioned, either flooding or drought. And more importantly, understanding your treatment process, having an intimate knowledge of what your kit holds, what its role is, how often this, that, or the other needs to be changed out. And one thing that we push for community supply, particularly the operators, is having a succession plan. What we have found is a lot of the people who are operators for community supplies, they are older than me, and that's saying something. So ensuring that there is a succession plan or a sharing of knowledge, so that in the event that your operator isn't available for whatever reason, you do have someone who still has that mātauranga or that knowledge that can still operate your treatment plant. So as you've heard from Neil and Rachel, our kōrero and my kōrero is just probably a little bit different to theirs, and that's what I'm talking about in terms of us trying to progress the community supplies across that pipeline towards drinking safe drinking water from where we are. Guidance. Now, we've recently stood up our guidance design hub, and as a result of that, their key factors for them is to design guidance across the organisation, and it would be fair to say that they're working flat stick at the moment, because they are probably one of the most popular work groups within the organisation, and they're having to provide guidance for community supplies, also leaning into notifications. So there's a wide gambit of work that they're doing. The role of my team is to try and collate as much information from the engagements that we have with these community supplies to bring them back, or bring that information back, so it can be put into fit for purpose, relevant, valuable guidance to support those the operators of community supplies. And I'm pretty sure I've done my 5 minutes, and I'll be getting a tap on the shoulder from Ainsley shortly. I think I'm heading to
Thanks, Troy.
Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. So to talk a bit about monitoring compliance. So we take a risk-based approach to monitoring compliance. So our focus, as has been spoken about before, will be on reporting of the rules and any failure to report on those rules as well, alongside exceedances of the drinking water standards. So these two things are really key indicators that something's going wrong. So the basement treatment barriers are not operating effectively. And where those risks are identified, we may do a range of things. We might review a drinking water safety plan, we might ask for some more information, we might do a site visit in order for us to understand the seriousness of that risk and determine what approach we need to take. Over to you, Neil, to talk about enforcement.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So enforcement action is we'll take enforcement action when we need to protect the public health, or there's a need to deter future offending, especially where the behaviour is reckless and people have been harmed, or there is a serious risk that they could be. We've got a range of tools available to us depending on the situation. We'll consider all factors when we're looking at enforcement action, such as how much harm has been done or could be done to consumers, whether you, the supplier, is trying to do the right thing, whether you, the supplier, has had a history of deliberate or repeated non-compliance, and how urgently we need to act to protect public health to maintain the community's trust in their drinking water, or whether we need to deter future offending by the supplier. What tools do we have available to us? The corrective tools we would be using are direction notices, so giving instructions for a supplier to take action. Enforceable undertakings, where a supplier can propose a legally binding agreement to fix that problem and prevent it from happening again. Or compliance order, so a legal requirement to fix a problem that we've identified and to prevent them from happening in the first place. Other punitive tools would include written warnings, infringement notices, which we don't actually have an infringement regime at this point in time, but we're working on establishing one of those soon. That would be for minor issues that would need a quick correction. Civil proceedings, and at the very pointy end would be prosecutions. The other enforcement tools would align with when we have a serious issue or an emergency situation where we can declare a drinking water emergency. The Act provides us powers to operate in that situation, or where a supplier has persistently failed to meet their compliance obligations and or if there's a serious risk to public health relating to the supply, we can, or our chief executive can appoint an operator to act in place of the supplier, so statutory management. So those are what our enforcement tools look like. But certainly we would be giving consideration to the circumstances and factors and ensure that whatever action we take is appropriate. Thanks, Ainsley.
So when we are going about our work, we're committed to acting in a way that's equitable, consistent and transparent. And there's two parts that I want to talk to about. First, in terms of being transparent, we're clear about our priorities and expectations of suppliers and meeting those. And as I spoke to before, we take a risk-based approach. So we prioritise our actions and expectations to address the biggest risks to public health. But we're also looking to suppliers to ensure that they are proactive and they're really engaged in actually addressing risks in their suppliers as well, particularly those suppliers that are better resourced and highly capable as well. So as Troy talked to before, we're supporting those smaller community suppliers with guidance and technical support and materials. As I spoke to before, we're monitoring compliance and we'll engage with suppliers when we see issues. We may ask to see more information. We may come and do a site visit. We're acting where there's an ongoing non-compliance or risk of harm, sometimes using the tools that Neil spoke to. And we're ensuring that our regulatory activities and decisions are proportionate to the risks, issues and harms that they address. And at the heart of all this is protecting public health and serving the public interest. So we are definitely proportionate in what we do, and we consider the scale, complexity and risk of the supply and the risk profile of the supplier, as well as the costs of different options for compliance. I think I'm handing over to Neil.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So what can suppliers expect from us? So what you see here on this slide is the VAID model based on, for those of you familiar with regulatory practice, the Braithwaite pyramid. So we will focus our regulatory efforts on suppliers, issues and practices that represent the highest risk to public health. We refer to this as the VAID model here, so voluntary, assisted, directed and enforced make up the acronym VAID. When we're deciding what tools to use in response to non-compliance or a risk to public health, we'll consider how much harm has been done or could be done to consumers, whether the supplier is trying to do the right thing, whether the supplier has a history of deliberate or repeated non-compliance, how urgently we need to act to protect public health and maintain the community's trust, whether we need to deter future offending by the supplier or others. So my challenge to you today was, as a supplier, ask yourself this question: where would you want to sit in this pyramid, and what do you need to ensure that is where you are positioned? So, what you need to do to ensure that that's where you're positioned on the pyramid. So ideally, we'd like to see everyone in the green, championing good practice and doing the right thing. Yeah, so, sorry. Just Oh, I just lost my notes. There we go. So our primary focus, of course, as we've said, is on ensuring the drinking water supplies demonstrate you've got basic barriers in place and that the barriers are operating effectively. So thank you, Ainsley.
Thanks, Neil. That's awesome. And I can see a couple of questions coming through in the Q&A. We're actually nearly at the end of, well, we are at the end of most of our prepared slides. So please do pop your questions in and we'll have a bit of a moment for some of our team to answer the questions that you've put through already. So thank you heaps to all of our presenters. It was a whip through lots of those key aspects of the CME. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, we're all here to get to that safe water every day for everyone goal. And so be really keen to hear your questions, your observations around all of that. So before I go to questions, I'll just note that you can find the full strategy on our website. When the website actually has just very recently been refreshed, so there'll be lots of good resources for you on there to have a look at. So do head to tamataarawai.govt.nz, and if you search compliance monitoring and enforcement strategy, it should pop up for you. I think it's there on the homepage at the moment as well. So we will start moving then into our questions, and I can see that there's already a couple that have popped up on the chat. So I think this first one from Tony, I think, Noah, did you want to jump in? Did you have any thoughts? Might be a Noah and Troy combo on this one.
Yeah. So I think, thanks, Tony, for your question. I've had the fortunate experience of visiting a few of those supplies and kind of I've met a few people. So we've recently relaxed, we've revised the level 2 and level 1 rules to be a bit more flexible with scheduling your sampling visits. But in the end, I think it's probably best to get in touch with Rachel and Neil's team, depending on whether you're in the North or South Island, and they might actually just hand you over to Troy, so he can have a friendly call with you.
Anything to add on that, Troy? You're on mute.
Sorry, technological problems, Whānau. Yeah, I've put a response in there around the consideration of an acceptable solution. But hey, Tony, I'm happy to. I'm going to chuck my email address in the chat here for us. So if you want to continue this, I'd be happy to have a quarter or two, and I'll get a bit more technical advice to support some possible options for you.
Cool. Thanks, Troy. Just really, I'll read out the questions just in case people can't see the Q&A, but it is there if you do want to read them yourselves. The next question from Kirsty is around, will the register clearly show the supply categorisation between council, commercial and community? Will Taumata Arawai determine whether a supply is a commercial supply or a community supply? There are likely to be some grey areas. It seems like it will be important if the CME is going to provide some leeway to community supplies. And yeah, Kirsty, it's a really good point. The register, so when in Hene Kōrako, it will be a self-selection really for suppliers to select whether they're a community or a commercial supply. I think there is a bit of work underway for those supply categories in Hene Kōrako to more clearly reflect that distinction. So that will be underway shortly, and I'm sure you'll see that change. The key thing about a commercial supply and a community supply is I think there are quite a lot of supplies that will really naturally fall quite clearly into one of the two camps. But I think you're right, there will be some grey areas in between that will need to be worked through. The main principle of a commercial supply is that it's an organisation that's operated for a commercial purpose. That doesn't necessarily mean that the supply itself is operated for a commercial purpose or to make a profit. But some examples would be things like water carriers, or potentially some private schools, universities, where that might fall into that category. So that's that one. The next question is from Vernie. So there's a question here around sanitary borehead requirements that are outlined under section 3 of the strategy. And could you please clarify whether these requirements also apply to is it section or if different expectations apply depending on supplier classification? So I'm not sure if this is referring to classes or Noah, you might have some thoughts here.
So this one. So hey, Vernie, sanitary bore requirements are only required for bore supplies following the level S3 rules module. So you might also have to follow them if you elect the T3 rules module, but I can confirm if you're following the S1 or S2 rules modules, which I assume is what you're talking about. You do not have to have sanitary borehead requirements. However, they are really good practice to put in place. So if you are building a new bore or refurbishing your bore, it might be worth considering implementing some of that as a source protection barrier.
And the second question from Vernie was around, will Taumata Arowai be providing a template or guidance document to support suppliers in developing their response plans? Troy mentioned our kind of new guidance design hub that's been set up, and I understand obviously there's a lot of priorities for that team to start working on, but I would expect that a lot of the stuff around kind of incident response, we would hope to produce some more guidance on. It's going to be a bit of a journey though, and I do know that there's a lot of good resources out there for suppliers, so that if you are working on those plans, there's a whole heap of great places that you can go to find that guidance. Anyone else want to weigh in on that? All right, great. Alex has a question about plans to provide further compliance requirements for water storage. For example, a facility that receives water from a registered water supplier, such as the council, and stores that water on site in a tank or reservoir. Who wants to take that one? Looks like you know it.
Probably. So I think there are current compliance requirements for water storage, and that's to have a water storage management plan for any supplies greater than 500. It's really important that you have that. You don't, depends on your supply. You can make it that management plan proportionate to, the risk of your supply. Wouldn't expect a 300-page document. You might be a 2-page document. Just depends on the complexity of your storage arrangements. So I can confirm that there are compliance requirements already. There's no plans to introduce new ones.
So it looks like Alex's question might be focused on storage past the point of supply. So would that be different? So receives water from a registered water supplier and stores that water on site. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have water storage on site, so we regulate up to the point of supply. There'll be other requirements, potentially from council, on private property.
Yep. And then we've got one here from Neil. So I'd like to ask how E. coli exceedances in drinking water are interpreted by the regulator, particularly very rare single detections like 1 mpn per 100 ml in a well-managed supply with a strong history of compliance, particularly where those other key parameters like free chlorine, pH, turbidity are within specifications and there are no signs of treatment failure or distribution breach. How does the regulator expect suppliers to balance situations where the likely risk of infection is low against the very real community disruption caused by boil water notices? This might be you again, Noah.
Thanks, Neil, for your question. Yeah, this is something that's I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually. We've had quite a few different situations and quite a few different responses. And what it really boils down to is the kind of level of investigation you're doing, right? And the information and the evidence that you're uncovering as you react quickly to these events. And you need to take decisive action when there's confirmation that the water is actually unsafe. Am I going to sit here and say at 1 MPN you need to issue a boil water notice immediately? No, I'm not. Am I going to say that you don't need to do that? No, I'm not. It really depends on the situation and the capability of the supplier as well, and their response. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can step in here. Thanks, Neil. And probably in response to Neil's questions, we've had a recent event, particularly in the media, in the Hamilton supply, where the single detection was 1 MPM per 100 mils. Their free available chlorine, their pH, and their turbidity were all within specification. But what they did discover is that they had total coliforms discovered in another reservoir. So they were uncertain of the contamination or where the origin of the contamination, and for that reason they decided the best step was a boil water notice. And as recently as yesterday, another council had a E. coli detection at 1 MPN. They identified at the time it was probably the sampling tap, provided us with photos to show that why it was most likely the sampling tap, but again they still took the precaution of putting that boil water notice in place until further testing done yesterday and results came back this morning, confirmed that there was no contamination in the network. So they took that approach, which I think is the right approach to take. They were confident at the time that they had identified the source of contamination, but still they accepted that there could be a risk, and that's the approach they were prepared to take.
Thanks both for that answer. It looks like I haven't seen any other questions come through. Just someone give me a wave if I've missed one. So that might be us for the afternoon.
Ainsley, I might just say one more thing on response plans.
Go for
I think it's really important to have a response plan and follow it. And, this kind of question raises that, right? It raises questions during a response, and it's not the greatest time to raise questions. It's during a response. You want to make sure you have good plans. And there's a lot of councils out there that develop plans. And so there's quite a lot of experience in the sector on this. So point that out.
I was going to mention as well, actually, on the kind of on that real upper end of the natural hazards response, particularly for council supplies, do make sure that you're connected with your local civil defence group. They do this planning all the time, and we'll have some really good information on what are the different impacts of different natural hazard events on the community, on the surrounding area. And making sure that, this critical infrastructure that's required for water treatment is actually on the priority list for getting access restored and all those different things. So it is a really good step as well to be connected with those groups. Great. Okay. I think that is us then. Thank you so much for coming along today. Hope you found it really valuable and informative. We've got our team here. Obviously, you've got our website, which has a whole lot of information and has the strategy itself for you to have a look at. So looking forward to the next 3 years of working with all of you. I'm sure this is not the last we'll see of each other, and have a great day. And we've got one more of these coming up next week. So if you know anyone that is interested, then please do send them to the website to sign up for the next webinar. All right. Thanks, everyone. Ka kite.